let's move on to look at design and business model experimentation. So how do you actually integrate designers in this process and make them experiment and develop business objectives and translate these into actual design quality criteria? And this is a process that we were very fortunate to develop together with the Fraunhofer Institute in Stuttgart in 2012. So this is definitely the bleeding cutting edge. And we've been experimenting with it for the last year at Hanyang University in Seoul, Korea. And we already found out that there's amazing advantages by doing it structured, by integrating design early and doing it in a structured way. So I just want to briefly have a definition so we are sure we know what we're talking about. What is a business strategy? It's the what's and the who's. What is a business model? It's the configuration of activities. It's how the organizational units are linked and how it basically serves a specific need in the market. And then the innovation part is, of course, reconfiguring these activities to create new products and services. This is the model that we are using for creating the translation. So if you look at the left-hand side, are you familiar with the components? So if you're familiar with the business model canvas, these are the 9 elements in a business model, according to Osterwalds. It's not the ideal way of mapping it, but it's the most understandable and the most common use. So if you know how to make allowances for the drawbacks, this is a very, very useful model. And these are the activities. If you look at the orange-colored activities, those are the ones where design have direct influence. So that's about 4 out of the 9, right? Then basically, these business model components need to be translated into the 9 design quality criteria. And here, of course, the designers have influence on all 9 of them, right? And the way you make that translation, right, it's the organization that does that, right? So it's through your coordination and your incentives. It's how you align the project with the culture, the organizational architecture, your routines and assets. And as you can imagine, right, how you align these is going to determine your competitive advantage, right? So if you are looking at aligning it with your assets, right? So we're talking about moving money around. Well, every Dick and Harry, can do that, right? Moving money around is not that difficult, right? It's easy to duplicate and somebody to take and use as an idea. But integrating all the way up at a cultural level is much, much harder. So we're talking about BMW, of course, Apple, Nike, Dyson, integrating the translation all the way up at the cultural level. And these are the models we've been using for framing the world. So you may be familiar with the environmental strategy, right? So first you're looking at where is your company located in the world, right? So where are you located along malleability? How much influence do you have on the world around you? How much can you change it? And on the other axis, you have predictability. How much can you predict what's going to happen? Because depending on where you live in the space, it's very much going to determine what kind of opportunities you have. And once you determine that, you want to figure out what kind of strategy you want to use. Do you want to have a technology push, or do you want to have a market pull? So those are the 2 classical strategies for approaching your new product development. And this is the model we developed. So we're talking about, let me walk you through it. Designers are included in the business strategy. Then they are helping experimenting with your business model canvas. And you, of course, see iterations between the phases, right? Then they are co-creating, all of them, the design brief as well as the business plan. And then basically over here, you start doing the concepts. And as I like to say, especially early in the morning, right, you're designing important things like a square cup of coffee, round cup of coffee, or a triangular cup of coffee. So these are the different concepts. And in the old days, as I like to say, and often very much also in companies today, is that when the design brief was handed to the designers, it became the Bible, it became the law, right? So you follow the design brief. By including the designers all the way up front, they know the assumptions behind the brief. So if they hit on some unexpected concept or directions that wasn't anticipated, they can go back, and reevaluate the assumptions and say, well, if we tune things a little bit differently, right, we might not want to, cut out the triangular cup. It might actually be a very viable concept. So that's a way of basically being able to create a feedback loop and help the designers create the feedback loop by them having an understanding of the steps and the assumptions that went before that. So let me give you an example here. Are you familiar with Fisker Automotive? So most people are probably familiar with Tesla. So this Tesla is the electrical vehicle up in Palo Alto in California, right? That's doing very well. And Fisker Automotives are the ones that are not. So I think they just got out of bankruptcy and got bought by a Chinese company. But this is basically an example of the business model for Fisker Automotive and their Karma car, right? So here you can see, partners were traditional automotive partners. Cost structure and revenue was also traditional. But basically where they created their innovation was in the value proposition. So basically they're talking about radical, classical styling. So something that doesn't have to be changed every 4 years or 6 years, but something that would be able to last a longer time. Top performance, we're looking at a 4-person sedan that can accelerate from 0 to 60, in 5 seconds or so. And at the same time, it has half the CO2 emission of a Prius, right? Of course, not if you're accelerating all the time, but if you're driving normally, your Fisker car will basically perform twice as well as a Prius. And that was a very attractive value proposition to these kind of people that are upper income, family of 4, probably smaller children, right? Talking people that are car or auto aficionados and feel a responsibility to the environment. Don't just want a V12 and 600 horsepower goggling. So this was basically an example of a business model experimentation at Fisker Automotive. Then comes the trick of, during the experimentation, to translate the business model into your actionable design criteria, right? And you're all familiar with the good old 80-20 rule, right? Pareto's, the Italians. And this is found to be true in a lot of different cases, a lot of different industries and areas. Basically, and it probably won't surprise you, that 80% of your bang for your buck comes from 20% of your effort, right? And the other 80% of your effort you're wasting on 20%. So of course the trick is to focus on the right 20%. And what you're seeing here is basically deliberately looking at the translation between your business model and your actionable design criteria and making sure that you focus on the most important part of the translations that's going to give you the most significant competitive advantage. And here you can see that the dots that are dark are the ones you're supposed to focus on. But it's just as important to know which ones to ignore, which one not to focus on. So you also want to map in the bottom 20, it's very easy to get caught up in the minutiae and the details and the things that's unimportant. So in your translation, you want to mark which things not to focus on. So you stay as far away as possible from that translation, right? It's not going to add anything. After you've done that, you want to look at where your competitors are. And remember, this is experimentation, so it's not absolute truth. It's something that's happening very rapidly. It's something that's happened based on your experts in your company and everybody's best knowledge about what's going on out there. So you're looking about what are the competitors doing really well in their translation, and what are you actually going to be doing about that? How are you going to be facing and doing a better or different type of translation than they do? What you then want to do, of course, is you can't focus on everything at the same time. So you want to focus on the front end first. What is customer focus? You want to make sure that you take care of that part of the translation first. And here you have basically the models from the Blue Ocean strategy. So you can look at create new connections based on what you see. You can nix some of the relationships. Say that let's choose that value proposition and environmental is not important, right? So that's something we basically want to eliminate completely. And then something you want to dial up and something you want to reduce. So basically you can go in and compare your translation with the competitors and figure out how do you want to tune your translation so it competes best possible with them. First in the value, in the front end part. And then when you have done the top and the bottom, you put in the medium value. So if you look at the top and the bottom, the most important, the least important as your fixed stars. The other ones are basically the trade-offs. Those are the ones that you're going to be prepared to trade off in your everyday design when you realize things need to move around a little bit. And then when you've done that, surprise, then you're looking and doing exactly the same for the for the back end, right? And what we've been doing with master students at Hanyang University the last year is, and these are basically students that are between 24 and 40 years old, right? And they're already working for Samsung or LG or Hyundai or Kia. So these are people that are experienced. By putting them through this process, we could see that they basically increased their performance. So after doing 3 different business model translations into action, comes the moment of truth. And this is the time where you present, the 3 different models that you think are the best to your management. And then we want to make sure they're different, right? So you're showing them a model that is a low risk, a medium risk, and a high risk. And you're honest with them and make sure that you communicate it as clearly as possible. And then that's when you look them in the eyes and say, what is your risk appetite, right? In this current business situation, environment, the culture of the company, what are you comfortable with? Because you can't make people support something they're not comfortable with, and if it's not in their nature. So, well aware, of course, that if you are supporting the low-risk project, we're basically talking about moving money around. That's something that everybody can duplicate very quickly. And when you then increase the risk and you're looking at this model needing a very close integration with the culture and leveraging your cultural advantage, high risk, but also, of course, something that's very hard for your competitors to knock off. And this is the way I like to start things out. So now you've done all the planning, all the organizing, and then, of course, the designers get to the studio and they get out their paper pad or their electronic sketch pad, and then they start out, right? And then, whoosh, everything we heard just disappeared. And then, of course, the question is, how do you help the designers get off on the right foot, right? So the right foot might not be flapping through magazines, finding a cute little beetle from Melbourne or somewhere in the middle of Australia, right? And being inspired by that beetle for your new cell phone. Not saying that you shouldn't be inspired by a beetle in Australia, but saying that it shouldn't be the most important part of your ideation process. And basically what we've then been advocating is that when you start doing your initial concept development, you want to make sure that you map a space that's the most important one. So basically you take 2 of the most important components from your business model translation into action. So in this case, we have been looking at expression from high to low and features from also from high to low. And basically make sure that your design team explore concepts in all the quadrants so the decision makers and also for their own development seize the opportunities that are in the entire space so they're not just nerdling around, sketching around in one corner. And then by actually being able to show the full range of the 2 most important parameters in the translation and not necessarily the parameters of a beetle in Australia, right? Helps basically focus on the most important things in the beginning. And then as you start refining and detailing your concepts, of course, you bring in inspirations from other areas. Does this sound familiar? Is this something that comes as a complete surprise? Okay, good. So this is basically the model I've been walking you through. And basically, as you go through the design process, which is outlined here on the right, you basically every time you take another step, you make sure you make a loop back and see if something has changed in your previous assumptions. There's an opportunity to improve because you got to remember when the original plan is made, you knew very little and you made a lot of decisions. And now is the time to bring back the learning into the earlier phases. And of course, as you move down through your list, you're going to be going less and less back because, of course, there's going to be less and less opportunities to modify the earlier steps. I can tell you that in the projects we've been looking at, about 60% of the teams basically went back and had to modify their original strategy about a little bit more than halfway through the project. So it's not uncommon. So what does this actually mean? Is this going to make us more productive? Is this going to make us do a better job? And do we actually know that? And this slide basically shows you that we looked at the average grade the teams got from their strategic comprehension. And then we looked at the numbers of tuition biases that they had in their initial concepts. And as you can see here, the better strategic comprehension the design teams had, the fewer intuition biases they had, and basically the better concept they made. So there's absolutely no reason why you wouldn't want to give designers strategic information. So what are intuition biases or illogical conclusions or illogical thinking? These are the 10 most common ones we found in product development, starting out with a list of 106 and then narrowing it down. These are the top 10 ones we found. So just to mention the top ones, the typical one is the hard easy effect. So basically thinking that things are gonna be much easier than they're gonna be. Everybody falls for that one. If you're a good project manager and somebody tells you, oh, you just do so and so, if you don't get suspicious, you're not a good project manager. When people say just, it takes way longer. Trust me on that one. The other one is one that you may also be familiar with, is the pro-innovation bias. So basically, whenever you come up with the greatest idea in the world, right? Your mother loves it, your sister loves it, everybody loves it, right? You tend to focus on only the positive things, right? But of course, you need to look at the other things. What are the drawbacks of this particular one? And I just mentioned the third one because it's one of my favorites, the anchoring effect, right? There's this tendency to people fall in love with the first idea they got and defend it from all kinds of ideas from everybody else and not wanting to move on. So the first idea basically dictating the rest of the project.